Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will talk about ratio, proportion, rate, and unit rate. These terminologies are important in terms of recognizing what type of a word problem that we are dealing with and certain steps apply to solving for these type of word problems. So before we get into that, I would like to go over the definition of ratio, proportion, rate, and unit rate. So ratio is the comparison between two or more quantity with the same units. For example, with ratio, if I want to compare dollars with dollars, so I can write it as $4 and this symbol right here, and the $5, and often represented by a fraction. So I can write $4 over $5. So this one is called a ratio because they have the same units. So if I want to compare apples, you see I have 8 apples versus 10 apples. So, or I can say 8 apples to 10 apples, and it can be represented by 8 over 10, and the units are the same. So proportion is formed when two sets of ratios are equal and represented by an equal sign as fractions. So if you have ratio represented by fraction and you let two ratios equal to each other, then you form a proportion. Okay, so in this case what we have is we basically have two equivalent fractions. So if you have one fraction on this side, it's equal to the other fraction on the other side. And one is representing one ratio, the other is representing the other ratio. So what you can do with proportion is because you have two fractions equal to each other, you can manipulate these terms, these elements here, either the numerator, denominator, you can manipulate using the thing called cross product. But we will get to that in the next part of this video. Before I get into that, I want to go over the definition of rate. Okay, because when we talk about ratio, we are talking about a fraction where the numerators and the denominator has the same unit. They both have the same units here, right? So they have the same unit of dollars here, same unit of apples here. So the numerator and denominator, they have the same units. But with the rates, whenever we talk about the rates, then we are talking about something that has different units. And if we talk about rate, then we have to measure it. So if we measure it, it will be in terms of hour or minute or second. So an example for rate is a car travel at 100 km per 2 hours. If I want to represent it as fraction, then I can write it as 100 km per 2 hours. Okay, so the definition for rate is a special ratio which is used to compare two quantities with different units. So don't forget that. So if we have ratio, comparison of two or more quantity with the same unit, but we are talking about the rate, then it's a special ratio we use to compare two quantity with different units, and often we have the denominator measured as time. Okay, so if we talk about the rate, then it's better to have the definition of the unit rate also. Okay, the unit rate is the rate with denominator equal to 1. So if I have 100 km per 2 hours, if we talk about equivalent fraction, because we learned equivalent fraction in previous unit, then I can take 100 kilometers, I divide it by 2, then I have 50 kilometers, but this 50 kilometers representing in 1 hour. So if the car traveling at 100 kilometers per 2 hours is equivalent to driving at 100 kilometers per hour, and if I have the denominator equal to 1, then this 50 kilometers per hour representing the unit rate. Okay, so I have a few examples here I would like to go over as well. So we can have a ratio and then represent it as a fraction. Then we can reduce the fraction to lowest term. So if I have 27 feet over 36 feet, I can write it as lowest term by divide the numerator and the denominator by the same number. So I divide it so that I can have the fraction that I cannot uh, reduce any further. Okay, so in this case, you divide both the numerator and the denominator by 9, you end up with 3 over 4. So this example number 3, I ask you to determine the unit rate. So up here, we define unit rate where the denominator is equal to 1. So in this one, I have the car travel 1,000 miles in 20 days. So then you want to figure out the 1 day, right? So you write 1,000 miles over 20 days, but you want to change this denominator into 1, because with the denominator equal to 1, then this is the unit rate. So therefore, you divide both the numerator and the denominator by 20, and then the car actually travels 50 miles per day. So this is the unit rate. Okay, unit rate, because we measure it according to a certain element, which is now in day, uh, and then the denominator is equal to 1. Okay, so let's work with proportion. Okay, sometimes the word ratio and proportion, they come together, but in this case, this because you have two fractions equal to each other, is called a proportion. Okay, so earlier in the previous page, I talked about if you are having a proportion, okay, then you can manipulate the term in this proportion. So manipulate so that you can solve for the unknown. Okay, so in this case, is we call cross multiply. So if you have two fractions equal to each other, so that means just one fraction on one side of the equation and one fraction on the other side of the equation. And if it is of a proportion, then you can go ahead and cross multiply. Cross multiply means that you multiply across the equal sign. So you multiply numerator with the denominators, okay, and the denominator with the numerator. So that's how it is in terms of cross multiply. So then what I have is I will have x times 18 equal to 15 times 6. Okay, so I can write multiplication sign, or I can write this dot. So let me change that into a multiplication. Okay, so in order for you to solve for x, then what you do is you divide both sides by 18 now, right? So in this case, I should have 18x equal to 90. So what I will do next is I will divide both sides by 18. So if I divide both sides by 18, that cancel out. So x is now equal to 5. Alright, okay. So it doesn't matter where the x is. You can just go ahead and cross multiply. Okay, so in this case, if I cross multiply, means you have to multiply across the equal sign. Okay, numerator with denominator, denominator with numerator. So in this case, I will have 12 times x equal to 6 times 7. So I should have 12x equal to 42. So I divide both sides by 12. Then I know that this and this cancel out. I just have x left. So 42 divided by 12, I should have 3.5. Alright, okay. So you see that in this proportion, I put x in different position. Okay, so you have x right here on the as numerator of the very first fraction, and x as a denominator for the second fraction on the right hand side of this equation. So you see, doesn't matter where the x is, you apply the same concept to cross multiply and then solve for x. Okay, so this one I will do that, cross multiply. So then I should have 16 times 30 equal to x times 3. So I should have 480 equal to 3x. Okay, so if you have 480 equal to 3x, so it doesn't matter where the x, okay, you should just divide both sides by 3. So this will cancel out. Doesn't matter if x is on the left hand side or the right hand side, it's representing the same thing. So it's still equal to x. Okay, so this is the logic of mathematics. It doesn't matter if x stays on the right hand side of the equation, it's still equal to 160. Or you can say 160 equal to x. So then x is still equal to 160. Okay, so for this example, I will cross multiply as well. So I will have 5 times 7 equal to 15 times x. So in this case, I will have 35 equal to 15x. So what I do is I divide both sides by 15. So that cancel out. I just have 1x left. 15 divided by 15 is 2.3333 repeated. So let's round to just 2 decimal places and put this dot on top of that 3 to say that the 3 is repeating itself. Okay, so we have all of that done. Okay, so you see, doesn't matter the position of x, you can just apply the same concept, cross multiply, and apply the basic concept of solving for the basic equation for one unknown. Alright, so let's move on to this topic where I have the applications for the ratio and proportion. Okay, so now we are going to deal with word problems. So basically, what we have to do is, what you do is you have to figure out the unknown, what you need to solve for in this word problem, and you form a proportion with the unknown x, then you apply the concept of solving for proportion to solve for your unknown. Okay, so I would like to show everyone a trick how to set up this proportion. Okay, so before I get to this, I would like to ask everyone to take a look at this one more time. Okay, so you see the x is as a numerator in this example 4a. Now the x is the denominator in this example b. So if the x is in a different position, you see your equation works kind of differently, right? So if you find your unknown and you put it in the wrong spot and you form a wrong proportion, even you have applied the same concept of cross multiplying and solve for the unknown, but if x is in the wrong spot, you probably will have the wrong answer. Okay, so what I'm asking everyone is, when you form a proportion, I would like you to think of the ratio that I have described to everyone in the definition, right in example number 1. Okay, so proportion is when you have two ratios equal to each other. And what is a ratio? A ratio is the fraction that representing two quantities with the same unit. See, you have one fraction here with the same units as dollar, one fraction here with the same units as apple. So two ratios equal to each other, you have a proportion. So if you want to form a proportion in this word problem, you should do the same. You should follow that rule that you are going to create a ratio, which is dollar and dollar, right? So it's dollar and dollar. So with the unit, it's actually the same. like maybe US dollar with US dollar, Canadian dollars with Canadian dollars, then you let those two ratio equal to each other, then you know that you have the correct proportion to work with. Okay, so then uh, what I will ask everyone is, you read the word problem. So 1 US dollar is currently worth 1.23 Canadians. Okay, so then what I will do is I will write it like this. I will write it as $1 corresponding to $1.23 Canadian. Okay, so I should represent this as the US here. So I'm going to write this one as a US corresponding to that. And then the next question asks me, if you are planning a trip to Florida, I'm sorry, at a cost of $560 US, then what I would like you to do is you think of forming a proportion with this US dollars. That means I'm going to list the $560 US underneath this one. So $560 US. Excuse me. I just want to take a sip of tea. I am not sure if I mentioned this to everyone. Why I'm teaching the lesson, or I recording the video. If I pause that a few seconds, that means I'm taking a sip of tea. And I can tell you that tea goes with math really well. So whenever I kind of got distracted and make a bit of incorrect pronunciation like Florida, or I read the wrong number, I tend to take a sip of tea so I get back to what I am doing. Okay, so let's get back to this. So I've been showing everyone a trick, so I better continue here. Like I better repeat myself. Okay, so 1 US dollar is currently worth 1.23 Canadian dollars. So what you do is you translate this sentence into mathematics by just writing $1 US equivalent to this much of the Canadian dollars. And then they ask, if you are planning a trip to Florida at the cost of $560 US. So what you want to think is you plan to form a ratio. Okay, so a ratio is where the fraction that you have the same unit. So you are going to list this $500 US underneath this one, where you will have the same unit as US. Okay, so the next question asking you is, how much will the trip cost in Canadian currency? That means you want to go to the bank and you want to convert the money. So you may want to do a budget and you want to estimate that ahead of time, right? So in this case, you are going to put this one as X. And X dollar Canadian, is that what you have to figure out. So I hope that you see now, if you list this 4 elements, okay, 4 elements in this order, that means you will list the US dollar underneath the US dollar. You will list the Canadian underneath the Canadian. So you list them together like this. Then if I am going to put like a line in between here, so I will put that line there and that line there, you see, and put an equal sign. So am I forming a proportion here? Yes, I just did, right? I form a proportion according to the definition. Its proportions two ratios are equal to each other. And what is ratio? Ratio is a unit. The unit has to be the same, right? The fraction that has a numerator and the denominator representing the same unit, the same quantity of the same unit in this case. Okay, so you put US with US, Canadian with Canadian dollar with Canadian dollar, US dollar with US dollar, and you form a proportion in order for you to solve for X. Okay, so I'm going to erase this, and then I will write this as a fraction. So then I will have a fraction as 1 over 560 equal to 1.23 divided by x. Okay, so in this case, you see, I can have the solve for x by cross multiply. Cross multiply, I have 1 times x equal to 1.23 times 156. So x equals to 688.80 Canadian dollars. Alright, okay. So I will do a few examples. I have a few examples to go over for everyone. And then I will emphasize the same concept again. Okay, because you are solving for a proportion. And what is the proportion? Proportion is that you need to have two ratios equal to each other. And what is ratio? Ratio is a comparison between two or more quantity with the same units. Okay, you have two or more quantity with the same unit. So in this case, I have two quantity with the same units. Here, my two quantity with the same unit, the $1 US with the $560 US. Okay, so if you form your element this way and just put a line, form a ratio with the same unit, then you will have x in the correct position where you will not make an error. Alright, so make sure that you base on the unit here to work with. So why do we base on the unit? Because we actually just base on the definition of ratio. Okay, and put the two ratio equal to each other to form a proportion. And having a proportion, you can apply the concept of cross multiply in order to solve for the unknown x. Alright, okay. So for the next example, I have a fuel consumption for the 2009 Honda Civic. Is advertised to be 5.8 liter per 100 kilometers. Okay, so I'm going to write it like this. Okay, so this is a very old car. Okay, so just don't mind if it's not real. I think because it's just a very old car in 2009. Okay, so to be 5.8 liters. Okay, so I will write 5.8 liters corresponding to 100 kilometers. Okay, so now I read the next sentence. If the gas tank has the capacity of 50 liters, so this number 50 liters, I am going to list it underneath this 5.8 because then I will have the same unit here. So liters and liter, the same unit. And then the next sentence asks, how far can you expect to travel on one tank of gasoline? How far? It means they ask for kilometers. So in this case, x kilometers is what I have to look for. So then I know that kilometers with kilometers, liter with liter, I can form a proportion out of this. So I can put 5.8 out of 50 equal to 100 divided by x. From here, I can solve for x, so cross multiply 5.8 times x will be 5.8x, and then 100 times 50. So I will have x. Let me divide by 5.8 here. So this should be 5,000 divided by 5.8 on both sides. So therefore, I have x equal to, this should be 5,000. Okay, and therefore x is equal to 862.07 kilometers. Alright, okay, so then I've solved for, then it's actually quite true, right? So it's 5.8 liters get you 100 kilometers, then the 50 liters will get you that much. Okay, so I don't think this is a real number anyway, it's just an example because I'm not sure if 5.8 liter of gasoline can take me 100 kilometers. Okay, alright, now go with the example number 3. For example number 3, if you renovate a room, it's a good idea to figure out the amount of money that you need before you go to the store, because you don't want to rely on what the salesman is going to tell you. Okay, so it's always a good idea to double check, to measure everything ahead, and then to figure out the money ahead. So we have 344, okay, square foot, right? Square foot carpet. So I put square feet, okay, corresponding to $224. So this is the money here. And then what it costs to cover this, 1450. So I listed right underneath. So this, then it cost me how much money? Okay, so I make sure that my unit is the same, and now I will form a proportion out of this. Okay, cost multiply, so 244x will be equal to 224 times 1450. And what we do is we are going to divide both sides by 344. So this should give me that this number divided by this number. So this cancel out. This should give me x equal to $944.19. So we are talking about currency. So we may want to know that we round to 2 decimal places. Okay. So I have a couple minutes left for my 30 minutes. So I would like to just recap the lesson for everyone. All right. So for this unit 3, okay, so unit 3, what we have to learn is we are learning about ratio, proportion, raise, and then after that we get to percent, proportion, and application, and then all the measurement that are applicable to all the theory that we learned right here. So the next lesson will be percent, fraction, and I would like everyone to distinguish the difference between percent and the ratio and the rate. Okay, so that's why after this topic 1 and 2, I have an exercise for everyone to work on. Okay, so please work on this to master the concept of ratio and proportion, because the next lesson we are going to learn about percent, and percent is out of 100, and it's slightly different from what we are learning now. So ratio is the comparison between 2 or more quantities with the same units. Don't forget that. Proportion coming from ratio. Okay, so if you have 2 ratios, you let them equal to each other, you form a proportion. So proportion somehow can only identify if you have 2 ratios. Without ratio, you don't have proportion. So without rate, you don't have unit rate. Okay, so rate represents a different unit. Unit rate when your denominator equal to 1, but ratio is the same unit. Proportion is 2 ratio equal to each other. So keep that in mind. And if you have 2 ratio equal to each other, to solve for the unknown, you apply the concept of cross multiply. So cross multiply, then you form a linear equation here, a basic linear equation which is just solving for the unknown x. Then you apply the concept that you already learned, and then solving for x accordingly. Okay, so for the word problem, because we are working with ratio and proportion, you need to form your unknowns and your known values into ratio, okay, and let the 2 ratio equal to each other, so the x is in the correct position to solve for it. Okay, so you see, if x in different position, your linear equation will work differently. So if you put x in the wrong position here, you will have the wrong answer. So the concept for that is to form 2 ratios with like same unit to represent the ratio, and then solve for x. Alright, okay, so make sure that you complete your homework for the topic 1 and 2 before we move on to the next. Okay, thank you everyone.